Okay, so it turns out when I said that we were going to talk about phase 1 and how it was complete and all the things I learned, I didn't actually talk about any of the things. And then I didn't really talk about how I figured things out. And so it's just this kind of like moment in time where I'm very happy and heading off to phase 2. Let's fix that. My name's Zoe, my brain's a dragon, and I should probably show you my workings for phase 1 so that we both understand what in the world happened there. This is a process test, and what's the point of having a process test if we don't actually work through our examples? This is a test for a preparation process so that I actually have something that I can use, because let's be honest, sometimes Brain Dragon decides that we're not doing anything, and sometimes Brain Dragon needs all the help it can get. And also Brain Dragon gets excited and digs holes, and important information, like any of the subtext from the phase 1 complete video, yeah, that's all gonna fall out in like, I'm surprised it's still here, to be completely honest. First off, phase 1 starts with the absolute basics. Now, how did I come up with this as the absolute basics? Well, I was watching a lot of Brandon Sanderson at the time, and I also have done a lot of random reading of craft books, because that's what I do. If I don't know something, we go and research, because that's how we play the game. What that means is that I know that there are some elements to story that we really need to understand so that we can make sure we've got a structure that makes sense. Now, they are generally plot, setting, or world, and characters. At least that's what Brandon Sanderson says. But when I also think of things like right to market, that includes genre, and that uses a lot of the genre conventions and tropes to make your plot, because that's the whole point of the Chris Fox right to market stuff, is find the things you like and then find the underserved genres in that and the tropes that aren't getting used as much as perhaps they could, and then write the thing you love, and other people will buy it because you love it, and hopefully there will be a market for it because you've done your research and double checked where the gaps are. Let's talk about genre real quick. I don't know if I mentioned what I did when I decided to look at genre. Probably not. What I actually decided to do was to start with the main commercial genre, because it's much easier to find a swag of information on commercial genre than it is for something that is a little bit less clearly defined. For example, I decided that I was going to go with a romance as my main genre. It's very easy, very clear, and romance is one of the fantastic genres for getting your head around how conventions work, because they're really clear. You have to have a romantic couple. They need to face trials and tribulations, overcome their emotional shenanigans, and have a happily ever after, or a happily for now. But if it's not a happy ending, if they are not together at the end of the book, like one of them dies or something, that's not a romance. It is not a category romance, and you will just, like, we don't need to have that discussion. That's a different discussion for a different day. But the point is, if you want it to be a category romance, that's what you need to have, which makes it significantly easier to plan around, because you have a beginning, they are not together, and they think that love is silly, and an end. They've gone through changes, they've met each other, and they've decided that maybe love is okay and that this is gonna work. That gives us some story structure to work on. The second thing I did was decide on the subgenres. Now, for me, this is where I started to go a little bit off the rails. And by off the rails, I mean away from commercial fiction, and I went and looked at the elemental genres in season 11 of the Writing Excuses podcast with Brandon Sanderson. Why? Because I like them, and they make me happy, and they give me a lot to work with. And they've also got these fantastic sections where they have their elemental genre and how it applies as the main plot and how it applies as a secondary plot. What I did, because I got enthusiastic and then I forgot to tell anyone about it, including myself. Like, the reason I keep notes is so that I can check them myself later, honestly. So what I did is I decided that I needed to get some elemental genres in there. The first thing that I decided was, well, this is going to be a fantasy with element wonder as a subgenre. Why? Because it means that I can have some magical stuff in there. I am yet to include the magical stuff in my story, by the way. This is why we have layers of planning. But what I also did, I decided to go and have a look at what my setting was going to be so that I could figure out what was going to be the most appropriate. Now, I have a bunch of worlds that I could play in, and this is great, except that it means that I need to be really mindful of how much my brain can actually carry at one time. Remembering that my brain is currently busy carrying a whole lot of stuff that's not real useful, so I decided that what I was going to do was focus on the same world that I've been spending most of my time in at the moment. For me, that's a Victorian era alternative world fantasy setting in about the 1850s to the 1860s-ish. Probably closer to like 1855 to 1860, kinda, with a bit of wiggle room. The reason for that is I, some nanos ago, wrote a Victorian fantasy novel, which is also sometimes called Gaslamp. It's kind of the opposite of steampunk. So steampunk is the Victorian era sci-fi with all your cool steam tech. Gaslamp is a term that got coined to describe the fantasy side of things. So instead of having cool funky tech, there's a lot of magic and stuff. My world has magic. It also has airships. I need to keep my head in that world because I'm currently trying to teach myself how to edit, and editing is hard. That gives me a whole lot of structure that I can play with. For example, when I read Regency or historical romance set in that period, I want some kind of like comedy, but I want to play with the status, and I want social things and the whole love, but also stations, but also money, but also complicated. So what I knew is that I had been playing with a whole series of tropes in my work that I'm editing at the moment, and I didn't want to play with the same ones here. A lot of the time in that book, I've been subverting things. So for example, the normal idea is that the male characters have more social status than the female characters. Not the case in my Aerostats novels. So, in this one, I can go back and play with that. I can go back and use the genre conventions of it as I normally find them to make this easy for myself. And in this case, I'm not going to muck with that too much. So my female leads are probably going to be in fairly good social standing. We're not going to have any titles because I haven't figured out how that whole like English system works. So we're not doing that because the research for that is hard. I also knew that one of the things that I wanted to play with an ensemble cast because I need to get my head around it. And the best way to do that is to be deliberate in my practice. Knowing that I had a Victorian era England fantasy romance and that I wanted an ensemble cast, I went back to the Writing Excuses playlist and had a look at what their elemental genres were. Because I know that one of the things that I've been struggling with is putting the magic system in, I went, right, we need to have element of wonder as key to a subplot. I haven't put it in yet because I forgot. The other thing that I had was an ensemble cast. And ensemble is in the elemental genres, which is fantastic. But what I also did is then I went, okay, if I've got an ensemble, I know that I'm going to need maybe a 5-man band. I haven't played with a 5-man band before. Let's go find ourselves some references on that. What you need is a leader, a lancer, the brains, the heart, and the muscle. My 5-man band is made entirely of female characters because it's the little sewing circle, which was fantastic because I had my overarching genre of romance, my subgenres of fantasy, gaslamp, steampunk, and ensemble cast with some magic and wonder and probably a mystery in there because there's usually a mystery in a romance. And then I had the cast was going to be 5 people minimum as the core cast, as well as the romantic leads. We start with figuring out where we want to start. For me, was going back and looking at reference material to figure out what is in an ensemble cast. Generally, the leader is a fairly well-rounded character, and I thought, this sounds like a perfect character to turn into my protagonist for this book. Done. The lancer is usually complementary, and because I want to have a very community-orientated feel, this character was going to be someone who was supportive, but perhaps poked at them a little bit because my friendship circle is always very good at doing the thing where we don't let each other get away with bullshit. If we think you're making a silly decision, we will tell you because you need to be informed and make informed choices. The next thing that I needed to work out was what kind of brains am I going to have. Now, the smart guy trope can have a whole range of things, but in this instance, I kind of wanted to have them as a secondary sort of character because we're going to have a romance, and romances generally have their core cast, and we need to maintain those conventions. Which means that brain, heart, and muscle really needed to be somewhere that was in a supportive role. Other thing that I decided was I didn't want to have to try and think of these characters by myself. Tired me, sent a message to a very dear friend, and went, I don't know what I'm doing, please help, there's not enough tea. And then my dear friend, very helpfully, turned around and said, hey look, I know you haven't done it really before, but what if you just use, well, us, our friends, as basis for characters? And normally I don't do that. That is not something that I normally do. And there's really good reasons for that. I don't want to offend anybody by using them as a base and then changing them to fit the story, because like a lot of the time, good, well-balanced humans who are aware of their issues and who help each other and support each other and get each other through your issues don't necessarily make the kinds of decisions that end you up in a romance novel. There are reasons that romance novels are emotionally charged, and it's a lot of the time because there's stuff to work through. And particularly, say, with my friendship group will literally sit you down over a cup of tea and be like, okay, you are doing a thing where you're using maladaptive coping strategies, and we need to figure out if that's what you want to be doing, or we need to find you some new ones so that this doesn't end up being a problem. Okay. We're blunt, we're supportive, and we absolutely take no crap on any of that. Because friends look after friends, even when it means drawing hard lines. That means that a lot of the problems in romance novels, where there's this big inner turmoil thing, when you have that kind of relationship with your friends, it means that going and asking your friends for help is completely within the normal set of things. And that means you need to be aware and change the characters from who your friends are. That's why most of the time, except in this particular instance which I'm filming, because of course, I don't use my friends. I might take moments, or I might take phrases, or I might take cute quirks, or I might take other various bits and pieces, or an interaction we've had and use them. Sure, we all do that. We take things from movies and sources and all the rest of it. But I'm tired. And the first week of October was a really high symptom week. So my brain was not working and I needed something to go on. And you know what? I can ask my friends what tropes they associate with themselves, and they will tell me. And they will tell me what tropes they associate with each other, and they will be very kind about how they view me talking about it. I know, because I checked. With that in mind, it meant that I could take the base relationships that I have in my friendship group and stretch them and make them into tropes, which was fantastic. But the other thing that I did is I didn't actually use tropes. I know, here I am, talking about finding references, doing your research, doing it, and you know what I didn't do? I didn't use actual tropes. What I did do was I used my tropes. What I did is when I got to the main cast, our main character, currently, names are subject to change, is named Felicity. That is not my friend's name. I don't think I have a friend called Felicity, and if I do, I'm sorry, Felicity. It's not you, I promise. Felicity is our main lead. She is the leader of the social group. This means that she is going to have some traits that are built into that arrangement. She is going to be fair-minded. She is going to be able to see the bigger picture. She's going to be able to be detail-orientated at a moment that suits. And she is used to relying on herself to get stuff done, which makes her slightly less likely to ask other people to help her out when she needs it. And that's perfect for a romance novel, because you can't have the moment where the friends go, dude, really? If the friends have known the whole time and have not been quietly going, dude, really? That's your plan. That is a terrible plan. Let's not do that plan. Okay, thanks? So we need to have that. And then what I did is I looked at my dear friends and I went, okay, so I'm going to decide arbitrarily which one of us is the leader in this scenario. Great. What are the tropes or traits that I associate with that particular person? And I came up with a list of like core things that if you chuck them together, I'll probably be able to pick my friend. And I came up with strong work ethic, perfection is the only bar, talent, hard work, and making your own odds. And it's just not done. Now, realistically speaking, you could apply that to me. I'm not the main character, just to be really clear on that, but you could. Like, one of the reasons that it took me so long to even get started on making this process stuff is because I needed it to be perfect. You can't test a process if you're trying to make it perfect. You have to test it first. That gave me a list of things that I could compare to for my Lancer. The Lancer's job is to provide a foil or some contrast or some context for the leader. With my particular friendship group, again, we can have anyone in any of those roles at any time because we're flexible and human and have all of the traits, and it's fine. But in this instance, I've decided that my Lancer character is named Lillian, and again, tried not to have anyone that I know for names, but it's gonna be a bit messy, so I'm sorry, everyone. And to contrast the traits that I had for the leader role, in this particular book, Lillian is defined by the tropes of velvet glove, Iron Hand, Lady of War, Lady Spider sends an invitation to the fly. And wit, because intelligence is important. What that means is there is going to be a level of snark and sass, mostly sass, between those two particular characters as they're trying to keep each other organized. The other thing is that where perhaps our leader is a little bit hesitant or is more likely to try and aim for the best answer, even if it takes more work, our Lancer might be more inclined to go with the efficient answer, even if it's a little messy, because efficiency is important too. But she's going to do it in a clever, probably amusing sort of way. That's 2 down, 3 to go. 4 to go if you include the romantic lead, who we haven't even touched on yet. We then come to the brains. In this instance, because the brain is going to be a more secondary role, I need them to be perhaps a little bit less detailed and a little flatter than in other works or in other stories that I write. The tropes that I went with are going to be ones that are going to be easy to be subtle, but really telling for the character. In this case, the brains is Alexandra, and her tropes are, well, interesting you should say that. Prepared is the best kind of defense. Naive sage, and words make the best weapons because they leave the deepest, longest lasting wounds. As you can tell, there is a little bit of an edge to all my characters, and that's because I need them to have that edge of ruthlessness. These Victorian England-esque Regency historical romances don't have a lot of built-in agency for our female leads, regardless, because the societal structure at the time was so determined to make agency for women less of a thing. And my friends don't necessarily have as much of that edge. We live in the modern era, we don't necessarily need it. But because I have a different social construct, and because I know that from my setting, I can add that in, and this is why I don't normally base things on my friends. They might be a little bit harsher than they normally are. They might be a little bit more ruthless. They might be a little bit more inclined towards consequences. But in like, I'm drawing a firm boundary and there are consequences kind of way. And normally, again, we're very good about our boundaries in our friendship group because we use them to help and support each other. We don't generally use them in a way that is negative, I guess. All our boundary use is positive and affirming. So the next one from there is the heart. The heart in this story is Violetta. Now, Violetta is absolutely designed so that we don't have to have any sort of shenanigans with this one because, again, secondary character is just going to be there to sort of guide and be all like, yes, love is great. Why are we not doing this more often? Friends are fabulous. The role of the heart in this one is to provide encouragement and also to make sure that things just keep working. For this one, because Violetta is going to be a background character, kind of pretty much like the brain, but will be useful in key moments. And also we'll probably do the, but we love people. And also, like, if not seeing them is making you sad, then maybe we need to work on seeing them. So we're going to go with a couple of tropes that make use of, oh dear God, it's adorable. We're going to make use of some of the more light-hearted elements of the heart. So in this case, we're going to go with, oh, shiny, adopt all the strays. Your happiness is my happiness. That is entirely true of the majority of characters in this story. The people who matter to them will be their happiness. If their people are not happy, the characters won't be happy and they will strive to fix it. That's how we know we have good friends and good supportive people and, you know, people with empathy and compassion, and that's part of the jam. But because the heart is the moral center of a 5-man band or ensemble cast, by giving it to someone specifically to embody that, it makes it significantly easier to manage. This means that I have a lot of tropes to play with, but I'm still missing some key points. I'm still missing the muscle, and I'm also missing the romantic lead. Note how the romantic lead is not any of those characters. What I decided to do then was I went to the romantic lead, because I can use the muscle to tie in to creating that new friendship group to give us another bit of a lead, and also to make sure that we actually have the two social circles meshed together, which is exactly what we want when we've got a romance. We needed a romantic lead who would deal well with our perfection is the only bar, hardworking, determined, we do things the right way, thank you, kind of leader. And so we need somebody who also has similar values, but is probably going to push some buttons by being themselves. Now, the truth is, I could base this on someone I know. I have a lot of really lovely guy friends who are just fabulous and also ridiculous, and they're great. But what I decided to do was do some trope balancing. What I did is I looked at those tropes and I went, okay, so we need somebody who is also determined, confident, and we need somebody who is prepared to make hard decisions, a little bit nose in spite of the face sort of deal, because that's how we get into this situation in the first place. What we also need then is the muscle character to be associated with them. So what's the best way to do that? Regency or Victorian England, you make them related. I've decided that the romantic lead is the older brother of the muscle. The muscle is going to be a young woman, and because we're playing into the tropes, not leaning away from the tropes, it means that there is going to be something social going on that is pushing them, and so in this case the most likely thing is you move to a new area to kind of let a scandal die down, because that's what happened. You would go and spend time with friends and you'd keep everything hush hush. So that's what we're going to do. And that tells us a lot about our characters. If the brother is protecting his younger sister, and the way to do that is to go to a new area, that means that they have means because they're going to rent a house. They have social connections, and they also have the capacity to make hard decisions and make them fast. So obviously there's some kind of scandal there, or there could be a scandal there. Because of that, and because we know that that is going to probably be part of the mystery, that leans into those mystery for the genre tropes, which is what we talked about before, we can look at the muscle and go, all right, so what tropes go with that? We can have social situations are not my battlefield, which means they're also probably more lady of adventure, because that's fun, which also means the capacity to defend themselves. Okay, not in Victorian era, I think a little later than that, but it was this thing where hat pins were a real sticking point, I guess. God, that's a great pun, but it's also terrible. Ladies would be able to use their really long hat pins to dissuade gentlemen who perhaps had not got the message that they weren't that interested from actually continuing to harass them. Hat pins, ladies. Hat pins. It also gives us the option of making her just a little bit of a lean into that lady of adventure and having pants underneath her skirts. Rides a stride, does all these things. But these are all really good tropes because you have a really active, physically capable young woman to add to our group who probably needs a little bit of nurturing in the social structure, and that makes it fantastic because then we can make that 5-man band complete. And it's not that they weren't good beforehand, it's that this just adds another wonderful layer on top of it. And our romantic lead associated with it, which means that when the romantic lead cuts ties with the heroine, there is a consequence. And more importantly, they can't do it and then spin the narrative to be what they think it is. Someone has actual direct evidence from observations to be able to turn around and go, that's where you're going with this. And we need that. That gives us most of the characters. Now, the other thing that we're going to have is, of course, an antagonistic set of characters. I didn't really go into that. I should have, but I didn't. And the one antagonist that I did have and did come up with was who was it who pushed the romantic lead and the muscle to leave their social sphere and find somewhere else. That is clearly going to be somebody who is a gentleman of means, who's probably charming, and who probably is pursuing the muscle for reasons and won't take no for an answer. Because they won't take no for an answer, the muscle just goes, I'm not happy. And the older brother romantically goes, then I will make you happy. We will leave. This is fine. I will handle it. And that leads directly into leaning into the same sort of themes and tropes that we have for our cast, and that's fantastic. That also means that we have a new elemental genre to add in, and that's drama. And we can probably put in humor if we want to have a little bit of a laugh in the tone. And that's fantastic because that gives us a whole lot to work with. So when you get that much, that's why it makes sense. And the other thing is, that's how I go from having literally no idea what I want to do to process of elimination and then if then to make something happen. But what I didn't have at this point was an actual vague plot outline, which, huge problem. Because let's be honest, if you don't have a plot outline, even with all of the stuff we've done so far, the events that happen don't make any sense. What I did is I went back to the Jim Butcher story skeleton, which is basically when something happens, your protagonist decides can they succeed when antagonist does stuff. It's very, very similar to the Deborah Chester fantasy fiction formula Spook, which is situation, protagonist, objective, obstacle, climax. But I find it easier to keep my head around the Jim Butcher one just because I learnt it as a sentence structure, and so it just sits better. Now that we have our setting, our genre, our core cast, and an idea of what sort of things are likely to play together well, particularly considering the way that we've constructed that cast and the way that we've used those tropes, what do we have in terms of a story skeleton? When a new family moves to town, Felicity decides to make them feel welcome. But can she succeed when Lawrence seems just as determined not to be included? And her sewing circle think that something's up. Can they solve the mystery, make the newcomers feel welcome, and still manage their social season? It's not perfect. It is, in fact, a bit messy. But that's where we're up to at the moment, and that's totally fine. We now have something to play with. So this means that when I sit down, and even if I wanted to write from this point on, I would have my main cast, the conflict. Felicity wants them to be welcome. Lawrence doesn't want to be welcome. Lawrence is trying to protect his sister. Felicity is trying to make everybody happy. And we'd have that mystery. Why did they come to town? Why doesn't Lawrence want to be engaged in all of the social activities? What's going on there? And that gives us stuff to work with. It means that now we've got some really interesting scenes. We've got the potential for a lot more stuff just because we've done these things. I hope that that makes a little bit more sense. It should also explain why, when I made this sheet, not that you can read it because my printer is full of shenanigans, but I made this to put in my book so that I've actually got it. And what I've done is I have the headings of Phase 1, the basics, genre, which means setting, which means subgenre, which means main cast, and of course the story skeleton at the bottom. When something happens, the protagonist decides to do something. Can they succeed when? The antagonist has other ideas, there is conflict, etc. I'm going to put that in my procrastination folder. Ready? Panic. Phase 1. So now that's in there. I hope that made a little bit more sense of Phase 1. The short version is you pick your genre because it gives you conventions. You pick your setting because it gives you more conventions. You pick your subgenre because that helps you set tone and organize what your B story and your subplots are going to be. You do your main cast because it tells you what the main players are and what sort of dynamics they have. And then there's a story skeleton so that you can work out where there is tension between cast, the setting, the genre, and each other. And that gives you the bare bones plot, setting, and character. And conflict. That is all you need for a story. Like, you only need like a handful of things, but at the same time, they can be so difficult to wrangle. Simple, not easy. I hope that made some sense, and I hope that that clarified anything that maybe I brushed over, because I brushed over a lot of stuff. How I actually used Phase 1 to get from literally no idea and messaging my friends being like, oh my god, Nano, why? Why do I do this to myself every year? Why? To understanding that I now have a story, I've got some characters, I know where we're set, that gives me enough. If I needed to start tomorrow, I absolutely could. It would be a mess, but I've done it before, and it's fine. So this means that now I'm going to move on to organizing Phase 2 and figuring out what exactly I added to make it make sense. So there is tea to drink, there are stories to tell, and stories to plan, and adventures to be had. So I will see you next time. Bye, lovely.